Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is an IFBB Pro. Today's guest is Ron Partlow. Ron, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
For sure. So Ron, I'm super excited to chop it up with you here for the next 60 minutes. The first question I have for you is, who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
Well, top of the list would be Dorian Yates, the guy you have on the wall there behind you. He was without a doubt the most influential on me because I started training in 1990 and Dorian sort of showed up on the scene that year and got second at the Night of Champions. And everyone was like, oh, who's this guy from England? So like right off the bat, he like arrived right as I was like getting into the magazines and the gym and stuff. So I was like, it was still, Gaspari, Haney, Labrada, Mike Christian, Mike Quinn, the WBF stuff was happening. That was all when I was getting like really serious into bodybuilding, and then Dorian was there and he was just so different. So he stood out, and I got attracted to everything that was written about him and the training and the style of, the mentality and the way he kept things so basic and just applied like intensity with maximum focus. And so that sort of attracted me, and I sort of became like I guess a Yates, in what philosophy type of bodybuilder for most of my life. So he would be, my favorite bodybuilder all time. Jay Cutler also had a huge influence on me. Jay and I have been in, correspondence on some level since like 1999. So, he was kind of a relatively new pro and he hadn't gotten second to Ronnie yet. And like I had emailed him because of the message board days. I knew his email was cuts260@AOL.com. Everyone had, that old email that Jay had that certain people had. And I remember emailing him and he would respond right away. And he was just like awesome with questions. And so I remember like, really rooting for Jay and, following Jay and watching all his DVDs and all that sort of stuff. And then obviously getting to know him like, later on in life was pretty cool. So, Jay was someone I really rooted for, and I loved his look, like that 2001 look, that Battle for the Olympia where they shoot him at Gold's Gym the next day at Flamingo Gold's and there's all the red equipment and he's posing. Like that's like one of the most like ridiculous bits of bodybuilding footage ever recorded of anyone. And so that's, that would be one of my favorite physiques of all time. As far as bodybuilders go, like not just the physiques, but like, I was always a huge fan of like just all the freaks, like I loved Rule and I loved Lee Priest and I loved, like anyone that was freaky, you know what I mean? And not necessarily thought they were going to win a show or anything like that, Like I remember seeing Paul Dillett at Gold's Venice in real life back when he was like, as big as he ever got, like 98 or whatever it was. And so like that sort of stuff's kind of burned in my brain, Yeah. And then also Lee Labrada, like Sean Ray. I mean, I still think, if you ask me who's the most beautiful physique of all time, it's hard to not. I mean, Sean Ray 2000, like near the end of his career when he was just like really, really full and fucking shredded. He, but everyone else was just too big for him. So he was placing like fifth, I think. Anyways, that Sean Ray, unbelievable.
Awesome.
So yeah, there's a few.
Yeah, no, I just because I've listened to It's Just Bodybuilding a lot and other podcasts that you've been on. I knew Dorian Yates was going to be number one, but I like to keep continuity on my podcast and ask the same two questions. Now, I just listened to your guys' It's Just Bodybuilding Olympia wrap up, so I might have a little idea, but just for the listeners, some of these younger guys, the Nick Walkers, I know you spoke pretty high about him, talk about, kind of a freaky look, Just name a couple guys. Maybe they didn't even compete in the Olympia this year, but a couple of guys on the current IFBB circuit, Ron, that you just really appreciate their physiques.
Well, I mean, I love hardcore density on a competitor when I see someone who's really, really hard on stage and has that dense look. So, I mean, you know, plus I'm just such a fan of the guy as kind of a buddy, but Ian, you know, I mean, Ian, I mean, the side chest and, you know, some of his shots are just so cement and I love that look. Right. But then there's like guys like Rafael Brandao from Brazil, like that guy's physique. Like, do they get prettier than that? Like, if you actually had to walk around in somebody's body for the rest of your life, maybe you look like Rafael on stage, you know, like, so I have a lot of appreciation for a lot of the physiques up there. I sort of, one of my least favorite things about having like a podcast or whatever level of voice in the industry when you are doing media and stuff is I don't really have any interest in like criticizing many of these guys. I don't know why. I still just appreciate how difficult it is to be a bodybuilder and how hard it is to maintain. Like, these physiques are incredibly high maintenance for most of these guys. Some guys are pretty talented and it's not as high maintenance. We've seen it, everyone's seen it at some level, but for the most part, to look like these guys look and to carry this amount of muscle and continue to progress in the gym, especially with traveling and all this bullshit they have to do, it's incredibly difficult. So, you know, people say, oh, how did this guy bomb at the Olympia? I'm like, there's a million reasons why you could bomb at the Olympia. Obviously, you try to control all your variables and you're responsible for, you know, how you wind up looking. But, you know, if you're a pro for, like, you know, some of these guys are pros for 10 years and, you know, people expect them to not have one bad show. It's like, oh, there's a lot of shit that goes on to look like this.
For sure.
So yeah, I just, there's a lot of physiques right now. I mean, Hunter, unbelievable, you know, congrats to him. Big fan of how he looks. And, you know, some of these, like, what's that dude's name? I'm drawing a blank now. He's Aceto's 212 guy. And he was like super, super shredded. I thought that guy just blew my mind. He didn't place.
I'm not for sure.
Yeah, he didn't place.
He's a guy from overseas somewhere, correct?
Yeah, I don't think he placed well. His tan was like kind of messed up or something. But yeah, Vladimir Yakovlev from Russia. Anyways, like, that guy's physique, like, there's some guys like that, like, people don't know their names, but they're unbelievable, you know. And I even feel bad, like, when I don't remember their names. I'm like, it's hard. There's too many really great looking guys now, and, you know, they don't all hit their peak for the show, you know. So yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of talent out there, man. I think bodybuilding is really, really good right now. And, you know, people were bitching that it wasn't as good as the old days or whatever, but no, right now there's a bunch of great guys right now there's a bunch of guys that could win huge shows if their career just takes a little bit of a turn. You know what I mean?
For
There's
sure.
a whole bunch of guys that are just like, you know, kind of one really good showing away from being pulled into that, you know, top tier of guys. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we're starting to see a changing of the guard, so to speak, which somebody for myself who's just a huge fan of bodybuilding, it's exciting to see. And that takes some time to unfold, you know. So the second question, just to kind of start off the conversation, Ron, at what age did you start lifting weights? And then why did you start lifting weights at that age?
So I was 13 when I started lifting weights. I remember, like, I was in Taekwondo and I was a very aggressive downhill skier. Like, I was really hardcore kid. So, like, you know, I was doing martial arts when I was in my, you know, when I was like 8, 9 years old, you know, breaking boards, and I was, you know, doing backflips on skis by the time I was 10. I was kind of a freestyle kid, you know, like, I liked, if you put me on anything, I wanted to do tricks on it. So then you put me on skis, I want to do tricks on the skis. You put me on a bike, I wanted to do tricks on the bike. I wasn't attracted to racing. or anything. Like a lot of the kids I knew, they got put on skis and they wanted to race. And I'm like, I don't care how fast you are. What I fucking want to have fun, you know? I just was kind of weirdly attracted to that. So freestyle BMX was huge when I was a kid. You know, I was always doing tricks on bikes and riding ramps and stuff, and, you know, falling down, and, you know, I was pretty rough and tumble. I was a farm kid too. And yeah, I was just kind of into that sort of stuff. And I remember, I think 13 is like, you know, you hit puberty and you start to like notice that some other guys have more muscle than you. And I kind of noticed at a very young, like a just, you know, 13, you're just hitting puberty. And you're like, huh, some guys are getting arms now, and I'm not really getting arms. You know, do something about this. And I don't know. And I was super physically aware because of martial arts. So I already was doing like, you know, fucking 100 push-ups a day or whatever I had to do for Taekwondo. And I was doing sit-ups and stuff. So I was already like working out and super fit. I didn't have abs or anything. And I wanted to see abs. I remember thinking I wanted to have abs, because some of the guys at Taekwondo had abs and they just weren't even like, they're just like normal dudes that just came to Taekwondo class and they had abs. And I'm like, huh, I want abs. So yeah, I started lifting some weights in the basement, just like the old weight set. Like, not, I was just, you know, fucking around, like looking at the big plastic weeder chart on the wall and like just, you know, 50-pound bench or whatever. And then when I turned 14, I joined a gym. And I went to the gym every single day with these two guys that I went to school with that were both bigger than me. So there's these two guys in grade 9 that had bigger arms than everyone else. And they went to the gym. And so I started going with them. And that was it. As soon as I went to a gym and I saw people squatting and deadlifting, and like, you know, it was pretty cool little gym for 1990. It was like a little community gym, but they were playing like AC/DC and Metallica and stuff. Like, it was, I just thought that's how all gyms were. But I had a good start.
Now, what did your, obviously I'm thinking that your parents probably had to at least sign off on this, or what did your parents think when you started going to the gym?
Well, my older brother was a hockey player. And so my mom was like, anything but hockey. I don't care what you do. It's all easier than hockey and it's way cheaper. So do whatever the hell you want. I don't care. You want $1,000 bike? No problem, because you're still saving us a shit ton of money.
Yeah.
So I was kind of spoiled, because as long as I didn't play hockey, I could do anything. My mom just didn't want the driving, all the hockey parent bullshit. So, you know, giving me a freestyle bike and then not having to worry about me for 8 hours a day was no problem at all. That was easy to talk her into that. You know, Taekwondo class, all she had to do was I just walked there after school, and then she just had to pick me up.
Easy, simple, right?
Yeah, so I was like super, like I could do whatever sport I wanted because I had no interest in hockey. So
Yeah.
that was fine.
So I like to kind of transition from that question. Obviously, you've mentioned a little bit of kind of growing up on a farm and things like that, but just paint the picture a little bit about the childhood. It sounds like you were very active, but you already mentioned your older brother, but just touch on that childhood a little bit. You grew up in Canada. Maybe just talk about the community you grew up in up to about high school, and then we'll move on from there, Ron.
Yeah, well, I grew up on a farm in Grand Prairie, Alberta. So it's a northern Alberta town. So, you know, brutal winters, you know, beautiful summers. You know, the town was about 30,000 people when I grew up there. So, you know, it had everything you could need, but, you know, it was small. You know, it's about 5 hours to Edmonton. So if you wanted to go see like a good concert, you had to drive to Edmonton. But otherwise it was good, you know. And yeah, I don't know, just I stayed out of trouble as a kid because I was always into something that I was focused on, you know. Like there was lots of opportunities for trouble, you know, but I was like, oh, I got, you know, I want to ski tomorrow morning. I'm going skiing tomorrow. And this is at like pretty young ages, like, you know, I want to ride my bike tomorrow for like 8 hours, so I have to go to bed, or, you know, stuff like that. You know, I was huge into video games and stuff, so I was pretty easy. I just played video games and did super active shit, and you know, helped my dad on the farm a little bit. That's, you know, valuable work lesson. You know, you have to, you know, learn how to work if you grow up on a farm. So that's pretty cool. I think that served me, and And yeah, I just, I played football in high school too. So that was like that was my only team sport venture. And I remember liking it, but not totally loving it. And I remember, my coaches and stuff were like, "You're going to go play college ball, right?" And I was like, "No." And they're like, "What?" Like that sort of thing, like, I made the all-star team, but I didn't play in the game because I was already done high school. And I was like, "Oh no, I'm already bodybuilding." And they're like, "But you made the all-star team. You got to come play in the all-star game." And I was like, no, I'm bodybuilding. So that sort of thing, yeah, it was just, and bodybuilding just got me young. That was, and I just was 100% into it, so yeah, I had it pretty good. I had like a good childhood, I didn't have it tough. My parents were, good examples of hard work. And, I, was the youngest kid. So my parents were pretty easy by the time I came along. They were like, just don't get arrested. That was pretty much it, you just finish school, make sure you're not a disappointment. That was my only, the bar was pretty low by the time I came along. So luckily I wasn't any hassle.
There you go. Yep. It's good stuff. Is there, just growing up in Canada and stuff, what, obviously you've traveled the world now and everything. Do you feel like being able to grow up in Canada and just kind of maybe the mindset in the area that you grew up was something that was a huge positive for you, or not?
Oh, well, I mean, once you travel the world, your perspective on how lucky you are to be from Canada, it gets, amplified. I mean, I can't imagine being from anywhere else. I mean, there's some great other places. I mean, obviously I've been to like 25 different states that were awesome. And I've been to Australia and, some other beautiful places, but there's a lot of places where I'm like, oh, this is cool, but I'm so glad I live in Canada, and that happens a lot, and so you have some gratitude for, being from such a great place, and always happy to come home to it. That's for sure. But I mean, I remember wanting to get out of Grand Prairie, like I was like 19 when I left. And I remember a friend of mine had been overseas for a while, and he came home and he's like, "You have to get out of here. Like you have to go somewhere because a whole bunch of cool stuff's out there. You're just going to meet people and do shit. You know what I mean? Just got to get out of here." And I was like, okay. So that's why I left. And like, I went backpacked through Asia for a while, lived in Australia for 2 years, lived in New Zealand for a bit, did the whole, working holiday visa thing, and met a bunch of bodybuilders and had an adventure. And so that was like, obviously like massively impactful for, the rest of your life, but I tell everyone, like, you get out of your small town for a while, at least.
That's I'm from a small town of less than 5,000 people in the state of Iowa in the States. And I couldn't agree more. Like, hey, you know what? If you want to come back home, but at least for 4 years of college, or as you guys say, university there in Canada, at least do at least 2 to 4 years away from your hometown or your home state, meet new people, explore, just realize that the world is so much bigger than your hometown or your home state. So that I love that perspective. And if you listeners are interested in a little bit more of Ron's explorations, I know you went over to Australia, I think. He talks about that pretty in depth in an episode just recently on It's Just Bodybuilding. So go over there, listen to that. We're not going to get too much into that, just because I don't want to repeat a lot of the stuff that other podcasts have already put out there. But I want to talk about, you mentioned bodybuilding got you young, right, Ron?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about just what was the pull for you in terms of bodybuilding? Like what pull was it to kind of pull you into bodybuilding and keep you there? What do you think it was, or what do you know it was that's like, this is what I want to do, and really nothing else?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think it was rooted in the love of the training itself. I remember like, I think I've always had, because I remember back to my martial arts days, I was really, really good at forms. So, you have like your katas, or where it come katas in karate or whatever. You have all your forms, right? And they're like the rehearsed forms that you have to perform to demonstrate your, mastery of the art, right? And I multiple times won gold medals at tournaments in the forms because I was really, really good at it. And I think it's just because of my growing up doing all the sports and stuff that I did, I was really aware of my body positioning and my mechanics. And, you know, like if you had to do something over and over perfectly, like every time you hit a strike, your hand had to be in exactly the right spot. And if it wasn't in exactly that spot, like if it was like a quarter of an inch too high, your instructor would like smack you with a bamboo stick, right? So things had to be perfect and they had to be reproducible immediately in exactly the same way. And so there's like a perfection of form that I've always sort of enjoyed. And I think that kind of got tied in with the training because I've always sort of been in, you know, in the constant search for the perfect set, you know, that was like, you know, just never ending search to try to find, you know, better form on everything. And so that's kind of something I've always appreciated. And then there was just the, you know, kind of the superhuman aspect. I mean, you know, as a kid, I was a fan of pro wrestling and, you know, cartoons and He-Man. And there's sort of this, you know, I mean, Conan the Barbarian was the first movie I saw where I said to my dad, I was like, I want to look like that. And my dad was like, oh, that'll take you 10 years. You better get started. And that was actually why I started training. So you know, that sort of thing. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff, you know. I like the individualness of it, how like it was all up to you, you weren't relying on anybody, you know. And sort of also I had some immediate positive feedback as soon as I started lifting weights. People started saying stuff to me. They're like, oh, you're getting bigger. And the guys in the gym were like, oh, like how much weight have you put on? You know, because I was 137 pounds the first day I walked into a gym. And I remember just like by the end of summer, I was like 160. And of course I was growing. I mean, I was hitting puberty, but you know, I was definitely taking advantage of the hormones. You know, I mean, you're basically on the best cycle ever at that point. And I was training full blast and eating, you know. So I started putting weight on real quick and getting bigger really quick. And you know, by the end of high school, I put on over 100 pounds. So it really came like fast, and I had such positive feedback right off the bat that I mean any kid's gonna want to keep doing it, right? And everyone's like, man, your arms are like an inch bigger already, and I'd be like, fuck yeah, you know. And I'd keep eating and keep training. And so yeah, I just, you know, just fell in love with it, you know.
Who were some of your early influences, or what were some of your early influences in terms of bodybuilding? Was it specifically 100% the magazines, or was there somebody at that first gym that kind of took you under their wing? What did that look like for you, Ron?
Yeah, I'd say it was largely the magazines and the pro bodybuilding scene itself. Like I was the type of guy that was, I'm like this with everything. If I'm into something, I learn it all immediately. So like within months of starting to train at that gym, you know, they had all those stacks of old Muscle and Fitness sitting up at the front by the juice bar, right? And I'd be flipping through them. And within months of starting training, I could tell you who the top 5 were at every single Olympia in the 80s. I'd be like, oh, 1984 Olympia was Lee Haney, and blah, blah, and I would just list the top 5. And I would be like, oh, 1988, Gaspari placed here, blah, blah, and I was just that type of guy. So the actual pro bodybuilding scene was like an obsession of mine. I knew like who won what, and, you know, oh yeah, the Olympia was in Italy that year. And, you know, like I could tell you all that stuff. And I had a few of the VHS tapes. I had the 88 and 89 Olympia. So I'd seen those like dozens and dozens of times. And you know, and this was at like a young age, like 14, 15 years old. I was already like trying to absorb all the history of the placings and all of Arnold's, you know, competitions and who he went up against and all that stuff. So I was really into that. That's how I am with everything. Like if I'm into a band, I learn like all the band members' names. I study how good how good of a drummer is that guy. Blah, blah, blah. I read articles, I look for interviews, I just go nuts on it. So I did that when I was young with the whole, like, you know, the magazines and the Olympia level guys, you know, that's what it was all about back then. It was all about those guys, those top level guys. So, and then, you know, obviously I saw some bodybuilders at the gym. Like I remember seeing my first shredded bodybuilder and his face was like caved in and he was riding the bike. And I was like, holy fuck. And he was all covered up, right? But I could see his forearms and they were just, I remember them just looking like they had no skin on them, right? And I remember being like, holy shit, that's a real bodybuilder, So I had all those memories too.
Awesome. Now, who was kind of your first coach or the first individual that you kind of like sought out to kind of help you with the bodybuilding?
Yeah, well, I guess the first person I ever hired to help me, I had like older friends that were like, oh, maybe bump your carbs a bit, or, like they would help me. John Davey and Nick Jones out of Australia were like huge influences, and they sort of helped me with my first competition. Like they told me what to do, and I went and did it. Right. But the first person I hired was Brian Logue. And anyone in Canada from the 90s or the 2000s will know who Brian Logue is. He, coached hundreds of people. Him and his wife, Donna, they coached hundreds of people out of Western Canada and Canada all over the place. They turned a bunch of people pro, and, they had, they kind of ran Alberta for a while. And I hired Brian to help me win the 99 Albertas, which was my third show. And I called him up and I said, hey, it's Ron Partlow, because he'd seen me the year before at the Albertas and I got third. And I said, I was wondering if you'd help me. And he goes, I've been waiting for you to call me. And I was like, okay. So he goes, if you do everything I say, he said this over the phone. He hadn't even seen me. He goes, if you do everything I say, you'll win the show. And I went, oh, okay, let's do that then. And he goes, okay. So, I flew to Edmonton to go see him, and he looked at me and he's like, Kate, we're 16 weeks out. You do what I say, you'll win. And I just did exactly what he said. And then I won the overall. So that was my first coaching experience. So Brian delivered, that's for sure.
100%. Now, how old were you when you did your first show then?
Well, I always say that my first show, I was 21 when I did the Northern Albertas, right? Which was the old level 1 show. But I actually did a regional show, not even a regional show, an unsanctioned local show in Grand Prairie when I was like 17. So when I was 17, I was like almost done grade 12, and they had like this regional, like unsanctioned local bodybuilding show. And probably like 30 people entered it. And I entered the juniors and the men's class and got second in both. This like 20-year-old guy came, because juniors went to 21, and there was this like 20-year-old guy came and won the juniors and the heavyweights, and I got second. But I remember everyone was like, oh, you got good lat spread. Like everyone was like, you got pretty good, you're really wide. And, I had some good feedback. So I was like, okay. So I remember one of the judges was a former Mr. Canada. His name was Winston Green. And I remember he told me, he's like, you're 6 feet, right? And I was probably about 6 foot at the time. And he goes, if you can go on stage at 225 pounds, you'll be like really good. Remember he told me that, because I was like 198 or something. So I remember having that number in my head, right? Like, okay, 225, I got to be 225. And then I thought, I'll train until I think I can do that. So I trained for several years. And by the time I was 21, I was 265 off season. And I thought, I bet if I diet down, I'll be like around 225, 230. And I weighed in at my first show, which I say is my first show. I weighed in at 230. So that was my first show. So yeah, 21 years old is when I said, okay, I'm going to go start competing and, try to do this bodybuilding thing.
And so Ron, was your mindset then at that age to turn pro and make a career for yourself out of bodybuilding, or where was your mind at in terms of that?
So I remember always being extremely clear with everyone that I never expected to make $1 from bodybuilding, because everyone said, don't ever bet your finances on bodybuilding, right? But that didn't mean that I didn't think I could win. I just I had no interest in, I'm not competing for money. Like, I'm not thinking of it that way. I just thought I just want to win. I want to be like, I want to be good. So that was my motivation, was 100% just to compete, And so I just, I thought, man, I had a lot of people after my very first show that were like, oh shit, like you're like big, you're wide, you got a lot of frame. If you fill your frame out, you could be really big, and like you should keep doing this. And so right away I thought, I think I can turn pro. I was pretty early on. I was like, yeah, I think I can turn pro. I can do it. I can do it. And I just figured it would take me a few cracks. And, my first nationals was 2000 and I got second. So I had that reinforcement, right? I'm like, well, I'm fucking second. Like I'm almost there, so that's how they rope you in. Right. So, wound up doing 13 of those nationals. But yeah, I always knew that I could turn pro. I didn't have any pipe dream of being like the next Kevin Levrone or anything, because I knew that was another level. And I was also aware that there might come a point where I get to a level where I'm not willing to continue to do all the stuff that you have to do, right? So I thought, I'm pretty sure I can turn pro doing things my way. We'll see what happens at that point. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because my way was I was like a little more conservative, and I was a little more careful and a little bit less aggressive with the supplements and all that stuff. So I was always thinking that way.
So you did 13 nationals, and how many of those nationals, Ron, did you place second at?
8
of them. And so from my understanding, at least back when you were competing, just having other Canadian bodybuilders that have turned pro on the podcast, the only way in Canada, when you were coming up to turn pro, was to win overall at Canadian nationals. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the most part. Then there was a phase where they would occasionally give a second card, but they wouldn't always give it. And there were even a couple times when they gave it to the second place super. So like the super would win the overall and they'd give the second pro card to the second place super. They did that a few times. I was never second when they did that though. I was always like third or fourth or whatever. So they did that a few times, and then they started giving a second card, but they would skip the odd year, So yeah, it wasn't consistent.
Now, this is something I really want you to share with the listeners, and that is, just this stick-to-itiveness, or just this endurance of like, hey, you know what, like in 2000 you get second place. It's like, all right, man, this is going to go somewhere. And then it's year after year after year. You just said 8 second places, at the nationals, the Canadian nationals. Was there a point where you said, you know what, screw this, like this is the last go around, and if it doesn't go my way, I'm done? Or were you so set on getting that pro card that you're like, you know what, until the wheels fall off, I'm going to do this? And I want you to talk about just the mindset, because I'm sure your mindset, there was ebbs and flows. And I want you to talk about that, because it's so easy, especially in our culture nowadays. And I'm not even talking about bodybuilding, Ron, but it's so easy in our culture just to throw in the towel, man, if we don't get the result that we want. But we know from bodybuilding and just, successful business, whatever avenue you choose in life, like you have to have that endurance. You have to stay focused if this is something you truly want and you believe it's your purpose, right? So I just want you to talk about that, if you don't mind a bit.
Yeah, I guess, my first nationals was in 2000, and, I did every single year except 2005. I skipped 2005. I skipped to get bigger. 2011, I skipped because my knee was bad. And I just thought, fuck, I need a year off. And then 2014, I skipped because my whole body was a disaster. So other than that, I went every year, right? For like, that's 13 out of 16 years I went. And I was just aggressively going to win every single year up until like, I remember 2010, I got second in 2010. And I remember thinking I was going to win, whatever, you know, I'm not saying I should have or anything like that. I just remember thinking I was going to. And it was one of those shows where I sort of let my guard down, and there were other competitors coming up to me and congratulating me, like shaking my hand and going, man, I'm so glad I'm here to see you win. And like people started saying that shit to me backstage, and it was overwhelming because I was like, oh, fuck, you know? And then I sort of like let myself believe it for a minute. And then I went out on stage, like literally like that night, like all day this had been happening. I went on stage and got second. And I was like, oh, and that was because I'd let my guard down. That was ultra devastating. And I realized I'd let my guard down. I was like, oh, fuck, I made a huge mistake tonight. I believed the fucking hype. I listened to these people, and they weren't just my close friends. Like these were like, I got other people's coaches telling me I was going to win. And turns out it was just super close on the score sheet, and it wasn't my day, right? But I remember I said to my girlfriend after the show, I was like, I don't know if I can do another one of these. And she was like, I don't blame you. And so I sort of sat on it. And then Aceto came up to me because I'd flown him in for the show. And he just looked at me and he goes, North Americans in 2 weeks? And I went, yep. And he goes, okay, I'm going to bed. That was it. That's all he said to me. I flew him all the way up there. We died, you know, the whole thing. He was so pissed. It was funny. He was like, okay, I'm going to bed. Like he couldn't even talk. And I'm like I said, I'm not saying I should have won. It was close. The other guy was super peeled, but I just thought it was my year, you know? So that one was tough. So we went to North Americans and I did really well there, but I didn't win. And that's why I took kind of 2011. I was like, fuck, well, my knee's a little sore and I don't know, you know? And so it was definitely tough after that. You know, I went in 12, second again. I went in 13. My body was a disaster. So many injuries, had my worst year ever. Placed sixth, just gutted, you know. So I took 2014 off. And then I remember, you know, I had a lot of changes. I'd moved and everything. And I sent Aceto pictures. And I was like, hey, I'm 20 weeks out from nationals. What do you think? And he goes, you need every single one of them. I got a package being delivered. How handy. There you go. So he goes, yeah, you got 20 weeks. You need every single one of them. And that was my last show. And I said, okay, this is my last go at this. And just him and my girlfriend were the only people that knew. And I just like super focused and, you know, turned out.
For sure. So just in regards to kind of like, you know, you said 2013, your body was just kind of, you know, maybe fighting against you and stuff like that. How did you mentally kind of, you know, work through that and kind of get back to that point where you were ready to get back on stage?
Yeah, 2013 was just so brutal. So it was all injuries and, you know, the knee, the hip. I tore my quad twice on my right leg, up in my hip, like high quad. I tore it twice. Just give me a sec.
Oh yeah,
hey, buddy. Come here, buddy. There we go. You got to live with the dogs, right? So anyways, you know, I just thought, fuck, I got to train a little bit different. Like I'm getting too old to train as hard as I do. I've got to do something different. So I, you know, started raising my reps up on everything. And I started, you know, doing a little bit, you know, more volume, less beyond failure stuff. Not huge changes, but just a bit of a shift where I felt like my body could kind of take, you know, the amount of weeks in a row that you need to be able to train, you know. And that was just my strategy for 2014 and 15 was just to try to get healthy. And then I even had these big breaks where I skipped body parts for like months just to try to get stuff to heal. So when I actually started prep for 2015, my arms and legs were small. So I was like, I looked like shit. Like I remember thinking like, these are my worst pictures ever. And but I just had to pull it all together. So I just tried to train as smart as I could. And, I started to prep a little small and stuff. So I didn't come in the year I got my pro card. I wasn't my biggest, but my conditioning was really, really good. So, I just made sure I was in shape,
And then what year did you end up earning your IFBB Pro card, Ron?
2015. Yeah.
2015. What was that experience and moment like for you when you finally realized like, hey, like I'm an IFBB Pro?
Well, it was more of it's funny looking back on it, like I was just relieved. It was just relief. It was 100% relief. Like I wasn't like excited about being a pro or anything. I was just relieved. I was like, oh fuck, because I was 39, right? So I knew that like I wasn't gonna like go do a bunch of damage and like go win the Tampa Pro or anything. I knew that I was like, it was near the very end. I might have a pro show or two in me, but I knew that it was like do or die. So it was just relief, I'm done. I didn't want to do that show again,
Right. You brought up Chris Aceto's name, and I wanted to touch on him at some point, and you brought him up. What has that relationship with Chris, personally, but then also professionally, bodybuilding wise, what has that relationship meant to you, and how has he maybe just helped you in terms of, business, life, and then also bodybuilding?
Yeah, that's been really interesting. Chris and I hit it off really well. We always hit it off. I met him in 2004 at the Nationals, and he didn't coach me until 2010. So I met him early, and I just developed a rapport with him because every single year I would go to Nationals, and every single year he would be there helping a couple of the guys from Quebec. He helped like Zamir Zabib and Patrick Bernard, and he helped a handful of guys from Quebec, and I think all of them got their pro cards over the years. But so he worked with a bunch of guys, and he was always there, just hanging out, waiting for them to come on stage, and I would always run into him and chat with them, and we'd always have a laugh and make a joke, and we'd talk about the pros, and he'd maybe tell me a funny story about Jay or something like that, because I kind of knew Jay like through emailing. So there was just a little bit, and we'd chat. And then in 2010, eventually I asked him like, hey, would you help me? And he was like, we're waiting for you to ask me. Like, it's pretty funny. He's like, I thought you were going to ask me like 4 years ago. So that's how we got started. But I think we hit it off because he's also an encyclopedia of bodybuilding trivia. And so he would make like a reference to a 90s bodybuilder that most people might not know. And I would get it, like he'd say, oh yeah, that guy's almost as pretty as Charles Clermonti. And I would go, oh, wasn't Clermonti the best? Remember and I would like, talk about him, and Aceto would appreciate. He'd be like, okay, who he is, right? Because most people wouldn't, right? So he would always appreciate that. We just sense of humor similar, so we just became good friends, and it became the point where Aceto was just kind of an advisor of mine on a whole bunch of stuff, over the years. It's just like he's got a really fascinating way of looking at everything, like the lens that he views life through, and how you make decisions. It's pretty interesting. So he's an interesting guy. He sometimes tells you something and you're like, I can't believe I had to ask someone for advice on that when the answer is so obvious. So that's how Aceto is,
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I had Jose Raymond on kind of at the beginning of this podcast when I launched it, and I asked him about Chris, and it's just kind of cool to get some of you guys that have had that relationship with Chris over the years. You guys always have great things to say, but it always goes back to just kind of like just a different breed of cat, an interesting guy. And hopefully someday I'd be able to get him on the podcast and chop it up with him. We're going to kind of start heading towards the finish line here. I want I want to touch on a couple of things before we do wrap it up though, Ron. Kind of just maybe speaking to some of the younger guys that are listening, that are bodybuilders, that are kind of, you know, climbing up the ladder, so to speak, maybe having that dream of being an IFBB pro, or maybe just starting off their professional career. You know, we talked about earlier, or you mentioned like, hey, everybody told you not to, you know, really, you know, try to make money in bodybuilding. Like you're not gonna be able to do it, but you know, you've had the fortune to make money from bodybuilding. What would you want to say to some of those younger guys in terms of what they need to do? Obviously, social media is a big thing now; it's part of it. But what do some of these younger athletes need to do to set themselves up for success in terms of making a living from bodybuilding or from the fitness industry at some point?
Oh man, people ask me this stuff all the time, and sometimes I feel like I don't even really know myself. It seems like some people make it despite what they do. It seems like some people make it purely because of their marketing ability, with no real actual talent in any other area at all. And some people slowly build a loyal, well-crafted following without really ever blowing up, and they still do really well. And you look at their Instagrams, and maybe they only have like 10,000 followers, which isn't a lot, but if you look at their engagement, it's crazy off the charts, and they're making good money on their, you know, whatever business they're running through Instagram, a coaching business or merchandise or whatever they're doing. So it's like, I think it just boils down to the only thing I can really talk on is myself. And I'm not even good at social media. Like I know what I should be doing, and I like do like 10% of it, right? I'm so busy with other things. But I think that everything that I've managed to do well in was just by being, you know, honest, saying I don't know when I don't know, and then speaking my mind clearly if I do have an opinion that might help somebody, trying to give out good information and never speak on things that I'm not really knowledgeable of, you know, like don't go to a physics conference and start trying to tell people about physics. They're physicists, you're not, you know, like that sort of thing. And yeah, I don't know, just be straight with people, be real. I mean, most people can see when stuff is bullshit and fake if they look at it long enough. But you know, people also have a hard time with shiny and new. They tend to get fooled. So it's funny, you know. Some people, I can't believe what they do is successful. Like I look at their content and I look at how successful it is. Like I'm like, wow, like I just don't find this interesting at all. You know what I mean? So I don't know. What do I know?
Right. You know a lot, but I definitely understand what you're saying, especially with social media. I mean, I feel like some people are just kind of throwing, you know, throwing a bone out there, and you know, a dog catches the bone and runs with it, and somehow they are quote unquote successful, right? I want to ask you about Morgan McDonald. He was a guest number 27 on my podcast. Awesome guy.
Oh,
Had a great talk with him. I know you coached him, helped him earn his IFBB Pro card, and you talked a little bit about that. I'm going, I think, out to Toronto to the Nationals on one of your It's Just Bodybuilding episodes, how you kind of needed that. Talk about you being able to coach other athletes, Ron, kind of giving back to the next generation, the younger generation. What does that mean to you? And talk maybe a little bit about Morgan and what it was like for you to help him earn his pro card.
yeah, I don't know, man. I love coaching good bodybuilders that are really driven, that want to, you know, do their absolute best and you know, improve. And so when you get a guy like Morgan who's got all that potential, you know, any 300 pounder, you know, national level 300 pounder emails you and says, hey, you want to help me? It's like, well, you know, here's an opportunity to work with someone who's actually like a big, huge body. You know, there's going to be a lot of moving parts. There's going to be a lot to do. It's going to be a lot of work. But also that's, you know, I used to be a big, huge body. So I have a lot of experience at myself, and I just thought we'd be a great fit, you know. And I don't really like try to get clients. I don't really advertise at all. I put up posts of my clients, like I repost stuff, but I'm also very focused on running the gym, West Coast Iron. I've got, stuff I do with Mutant. I'm about to start traveling a bunch more for Mutant and all that sort of stuff. So I only want like a certain number of clients that I'm comfortable with. And, I'm really fortunate that Morgan was one of the guys that wanted to work with me and still wants to work with me. And we just hit it off. Yeah. And obviously it worked really well,
For sure.
Yeah, it's just, I know, some people out there, like some coaches have hundreds of clients. And I mean, we know what's going on, right? It's not a mystery how you coach hundreds of people. There's a system to it, but I just never had any interest in like that approach. And I want to be like hands-on with guys, the guys I worked with, like, Chad Nichols and Chris Aceto and Scott Abel, even back in the day. I remember like he knew all his clients. Like he didn't have like Chris like knows his clients. He doesn't take 200 guys, and I wanted to have that real personal, feel. I want, when someone says, hey, I want to do the nationals, they're asking me to do nationals with them is what they're doing. I'm not just like throwing diets at some dude. I'm like, so I have to want to do nationals as well. Like that has to be the mentality. Like I'm doing nationals again. I already did that show 13 times myself. Do I want to do it another time? I might not want to do it one more time. But with Morgan, I was like, yeah, let's do it one more time, So that's what it means to me to coach someone for a bodybuilding show. I'm not just getting like client number 75 in shape. It's like, fuck, we're doing this show. There's, it's a big deal. So I try to be that type of guy because that's the type of coach I wanted,
No, that's awesome, man. It's a breath of fresh air and kind of the craziness of coaching and the social media stuff that's going on nowadays. West Coast Iron, I wanted to touch on that just briefly, talk about kind of how that came to be and how you guys wanted to create an environment or a culture there and how is that going?
Yeah, it was just, it's actually our 4-year anniversary today. So we opened 4 years ago today, 2017. And, well, they say that, things come out of need, right? And what had happened was there was a gym in that building that had closed because the owner had passed away. And I'd been training there because it's like 2 minutes from the Mutant head office where I was working and right by my house. So that was my gym. And it was kind of the only old school hardcore gym left. It had old equipment. It wasn't things weren't the best in there, but you could do whatever you wanted. You could train super fucking hard and no one's going to bother you. And it was kind of bodybuilder-ish. And so when that gym suddenly closed, like, everyone from that gym was faced with having to like drive to, a fitness club or a Good Life or whatever. And I was just, a few months of training at a couple other gyms. I was like, fuck, I hate this commute. I can't stand these gyms, or like, I just can't stand this, So myself and a few guys that were training there that were kind of buddies, we just talked about, hey, like maybe we should get this space and open a new gym. So that's what we did. So that's how it was started, was just out of necessity, and we just hoped we could build a really cool environment and maybe get enough of the bodybuilding community that we could pay the rent. That was the goal. And right off the bat, we were well received by the whole bodybuilding and fitness community. We stole a bunch of competitors from all the gyms around. A lot of the bikini competitors and the fitness girls came over because they felt comfortable there and no one was bothering them and we're getting stared at by old men and that sort of thing. And we just kind of had a culture right off the bat, people deadlifting and making noise and the music was turned up and we're playing Metallica and, old school rap and unedited gangster rap on, random times of the day. And like, so it just was right away. It was different. Like there was nothing like that around here. So we we were able to establish a culture with the support of the members rather quickly. And we were really blown away at how like loyal everyone became, because I guess, you know, there was no one else was giving them anything else even remotely close, you know? So we became the gym that, you know, people would be like, oh, you own that gym, you know, like that became, you know, with social media and Instagram, and they see all the, you know, all the girls posting selfies and all the guys posting the tank top flexes. And, you know, so we became like, that's what people think of our gym. But it's funny when you go there, there's also like all these other people that just love the environment because, you know, they're never going to compete or anything, but they love the music and they love that it's not corporate and they're not getting bothered by salespeople and there's no hassle. And, you know, so there's that whole appreciation of the freedom in there, you know? And so we're just really fortunate and thankful for, you know, the members and how well received we were, you know?
Absolutely. What's just quickly, what's something as you opened the gym and kind of got into that business side of things, what's something that you've kind of learned, Ron, that you didn't learn, or you hadn't learned, or you didn't know before you opened the gym, before you kind of ventured into business like that?
So, yeah, well, luckily we haven't made too many mistakes. Like we really only made a couple of like what I would call mistakes. You know, one is we kind of fucked up when we got our first website made. We didn't know what we were asking for. And then we wound up getting something that we're like, oh, this is what we wanted. And so that like was a waste of money. But like there's a few things like that, right? We have the best intentions. You're just like, ah, shit, you know? So, but there was no like nothing major, you know? I think that as far as I mean, I can't speak for the other guys, but as far as, you know, I'm concerned, I feel like it's very much like the bar industry, which I worked in for 16 years, right? You know, so I worked in nightclubs and bars for 16 years, and it's all about customer service. And you got your regulars, and you call them by name, and you know, like if you owned a neighborhood pub, right? You know, you're gonna have a lot of the same people every night, every weekend. You know, so there's that community feel to it. You know, the staff know them, they know the staff. You know, that whole thing. You know, you just try to keep them happy. You know, you try to do the best to keep the place tidy and clean. You know, it doesn't have to be the nicest place, right? Some of the pubs that are the funnest ones when you're young are like the shitholes, right? But they play the best music and they got the coolest staff and they keep the place fairly clean. And yeah, the bathrooms are a little dangerous, but you know, they're the funnest places to hang out, you know? So like, you don't have to be the nicest, you don't have to be the fanciest or any of that shit. You have to create an environment that people enjoy being around. It's fun. It's, you know, that sort of thing. So that's sort of what we focus on. And, it seems to really work for us. You know, that's kind of been our brand, you know?
Perfect. Yep. No, that's great advice. I own a gym, and that's great advice, great wisdom. Last question I'm going to ask you before we wrap it up here. What is your biggest gym pet peeve?
Huh. There's a lot. That's funny. I have many years of experience.
You can throw out a couple, 2, 3. It doesn't matter. It doesn't just have to be one.
Well, obviously, like not putting your weights away is just remedial. Like I don't even understand the concept of. I just think when someone doesn't put their weights away, I go, man, I wonder what their house looks like. Must be a fucking disaster, right? So not putting weights away, not paying attention to where the dumbbells go in the rack. Like don't just put them in the rack, put them away. You haven't put them away yet, right? You got to put them where they're supposed to go. You know, I'm pretty picky about that. I always was like super respectful with that. As hardcore as I was getting nosebleeds on the leg press and fucking being the kid that was crazy, I always put all my weights away and took all the plates off the leg press and all that shit. So you got to do that. People who are oblivious of how poor of a choice they pick to stand and do stuff, like, you know, people that stand right in front of the dumbbell rack. I hate that. You know, give some space. And I'm just not on board. I understand a lot of people want to do it, but I don't get why people want to train with their shoes off. I just don't fucking get it. I don't fucking get it. I get deadlifting, I guess. I don't get anything else. It's funny.
You need to talk. Next time C-Bum comes out to your gym, you need to ask him, because on a lot of his videos, he's shoeless. So
he takes his shoes off on the deadlift platform all the time. A lot of people do that. I remember doing that at one point because I was like really working on my deadlift, and I remember wearing Vibrams, trying to figure out if those were going to work or whatever, you know. So I went through that stage, but now I just think, if I don't want to put my fucking sock feet on this dirty floor, that's what I think.
Yeah.
But keep my fucking shoes on.
Yeah. Good stuff, Ron.
My training partner takes his shoes off for hack squats. I don't say a word. I just let him do
it. Sometimes it's best that way, just to let people do their thing, right, Ron?
Yeah. I'm out.
Yep. So Ron, thank you so much for taking a little over an hour of your time. Is there anything that you want to share in closing with the listeners, and then where can people connect with you?
No, man, I just, I appreciate, people watching the podcast. It's just bodybuilding, and I appreciate all the support over at Mutant, with the Mutant on a Mission series, which I just started again. There'll be new episodes of that coming soon. So, and of course, I appreciate all the support at the gym. So, I'm really just working to just keep everything going and getting stronger and keep doing what I'm doing. So rep 300 on Instagram. That's the best place to get me. And I appreciate being on, man.
Absolutely, Ron. It's greatly appreciated. Listeners, thank you so much for listening to Behind the Muscle podcast. Also, those of you watching on YouTube, I highly suggest you guys, if you don't know already about Ron's podcast, just go check it out. It's just bodybuilding, great episodes. They do a lot of Q&A stuff. They have a lot of guests on, great content over there with Scott McNally and Dusty Hanshaw. Listeners, 2 huge favors I'd ask of you. First of all, if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Why is that important? Because that is where I release all of these episodes first, and then I shoot them out to all the other podcast platforms. And then the second favor, take Ron's episode, share it on all your social media platforms, tag Ron, tag myself, so we know people listened, people got value from this episode. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.